Welcome back, students. We are continuing our discussion on Modular 6, Social Work Practice with Agencies and the Community. And we're going to spend some time during this video talking about community organizing. So let's get down to some basic definitions. Community organizing is defined as a type of social work practice as well as a field of practice in social work. So many social workers that may be even working with individuals, groups, more of a micro kind of approach, may find themselves being involved in community organizing, particularly if there's a particular issue that they've identified is continually impacting their clients. They may feel like being an advocate and going out and advocating for community change will benefit their clients. Maybe they've been seeing a really consistent pattern of their clients losing their housing, and so now they've identified that housing is unaffordable, or there is a need for a rent subsidy to be established in the community. They may then find themselves at a place where they want to start working with a community organizer around trying to address that particular issue because it's what they've been seeing within their relationship with all of their clients. So that would be an idea, a way of being able to think about it as a sort of an offshoot of doing micro work. So, but I want to get really clear on it's a type of social work practice as well as a field of practice. So it's important to recognize that at one point or another, often somebody who's working their way through a social work education program may start to identify for themselves that I really like sort of the working with the community more than working with individuals and families and small groups, or vice versa. Obviously, some people may feel like I really want to work with individuals, and maybe the community piece is not so much to my liking. But it's important to understand that if you do feel like this community organizing piece would be something that you have a real passion for, that could be the focus of your social work career. So not all social workers end up working with individuals and seeing people in a therapeutic kind of relationship or a case management type of relationship. Many social workers find themselves primarily working in community organizing. Community practitioners, social workers who are engaged in community organizing, planning and development to improve the quality of life for community members. So if a social worker begins to focus on community organizing, they would probably be referred to as a community practitioner. Community practitioners, with their use of the ecological and systems framework to understand the interactions between the larger community and its members, can be effective community organizers. So again, we're borrowing concepts from what we've learned in terms of our micro work, and we're beginning to think about how we can use it in terms of larger community social work. So let's talk for just a minute about the ecological systems framework. So again, if you recall, we're talking about various systems and how they interrelate and or don't interrelate to each other, correct? So if you're talking about communities, you could be talking about neighborhoods. You could be talking about two communities, something like a Fresno and Clovis, where literally you can't tell where one ends and the other one begins. And so you can begin to think about those as being systems that exchange energy, that interface with each other, that have boundaries that we've talked about and borders. And that when one system is having some challenges, here's a great example, Fresno gets COVID and all of a sudden now Clovis also has COVID. So, I mean, that's probably not a great example, but I'm just saying, when you're talking about neighborhoods and communities that are in close proximity to each other, you're often talking about that when there's a disruption in one community, when there's an issue in one community, it's most likely going to have some kind of an impact on the other community. So an effective community organizer will be familiar with community customs and traditions, social networks, and values. So we talked a little bit earlier about those gatekeepers, those folks that you need to make sure that you have them well informed on the issue and that they have become your allies and your advocates out in the community. A effective community organizer needs to have leadership capabilities. They need to have knowledge of the political systems involved with their access and leverage points. They have to have knowledge of past organizing strategies, their strengths, and their limitations. It's always interesting to see, again, back to our parks example, have there been previous efforts to try to increase the number of parks in a given neighborhood or a given community? And if those efforts failed, what went wrong? Why did they not work? Because that will be very valuable information as you move forward on a new effort. Will be skilled in developing skills and confidence in the people they are working with. Really, a good community organizer is sort of the individual who is able to help support and advance the residents of the community so that they can be their best representative for whatever the issue is that the group is trying to advance. So quite frankly, if you're going to a city council meeting or a board of supervisors meeting and you're advocating for a particular issue, it's not as significant for them to be hearing from the community organizer as it is for them to be hearing from a resident from the community who passionately cares about the fact that there's not enough parks in their neighborhood. An effective community organizer will be skilled in evaluation and participatory research. You always want to be able to evaluate why something was successful and also be able to evaluate it in the event that it was not successful. So if you had an initiative and that you were moving an issue forward and it wasn't successfully passed or it didn't become an ordinance within a community, you want to be able to do the research and go back and figure out why. They need to be skilled in program planning and development, be aware of themselves and their personal strengths and limitations. It's always good for people to know where their strengths are, but it's also good for them to know where their limitations are at so that they can bring in other individuals who's maybe strong in the area that they are not so strong in. Have an understanding of power and how best to use it. That's an art and a science in terms of really understanding how you work through a system, how you work through a policy setting body. I'll give you an example. So we are working on a project in Madera that we want to advance to the city council. At this point in time, there are 4 out of the 6 city council members that are up for re-election in October. So we are certainly speaking to those that are in office right now, but we are also having conversations with the folks that are running against them because we don't think that we're going to make it to the city council before the election. And so in order to have all of our bases covered, we're talking with anybody who may potentially be sitting in those seats at the city council to get their input and their thoughts on this particular initiative that we're trying to advance. So that's a bit of a way of being able to kind of begin to understand about power and how best to use it. And then finally have a sense of curiosity and the ability to dream and imagine. We next want to move into a conversation about policy practice. And again, as we've pretty consistently done, we always want to start off with some definitions. So when we're talking about social welfare policy, it can be defined as a specific course of action taken to address an identified social problem with emphasis on the decisions and choices that help determine those actions. Actions that governments take or choose not to take can have an impact on the quality of life of its citizens. Social welfare policy is the blueprint upon which social welfare programs are planned, designed, and operated. So policy is basically the way that things get prioritized and the way that services are chosen to be delivered. And as we get further into the discussion here, we're going to see more and more how policy really lends itself towards who's going to get what service at what time and for how much. And that obviously has an impact on clients that we might be working with that are looking for support in terms of income assistance or housing assistance or childcare assistance. It's the way that services are rolled out and delivered that's dictated by social welfare policy. Government body, whether it be a city council, a board of supervisors, a state legislature, or the federal government, makes a policy decision when they choose to move forward on an action, but they also are making a policy decision when they choose not to take action on a particular item. So while there may be communities or parts of the country that feel very passionately about issue XYZ, you are definitely being advised as to how that is being prioritized if there's legislation that just simply sits and doesn't get voted on. So social policy incorporates 5 core characteristics. The first one is that policy is the formal expression of a community's values, principles, and beliefs. It's important to recognize that when, for instance, if you were to take a look at 2 separate cities and look at their local government policies, you're going to see different priorities that are being advanced in one city as opposed to another city. And so not to wear out our example, but if we were to go back to our parks initiative, a community that has a parks plan, a community that has policies around parks. One of the ways that a community is often evaluated is the number of parks that they have per their population. So something like for every 10,000 people, they should have a park or something like that. There may be some communities that are quite ahead of that particular metric, but there might be other communities that are quite far behind. There may be communities that have, a parks department, a parks plan, parks advisory committee. And then if you look at another community that doesn't have any of those pieces, that kind of tells you where their values are at and what they think is important. So again, policy is the formal expression of a community's values, principles, and beliefs. Second, these values, principles, and beliefs become reality through a policy and its resulting services, kind of like what we just talked about. Policy provides legitimacy and sanctions an organization to implement a particular program or service. More likely than not, if a policy gets passed, there is usually revenue or resources that are aligned with that particular policy. So it's not only that we want this, we want more parks in our community, but we're also going to fund to make that effort happen, or we're going to make a commitment to go out and find funds to be able to support that. So that's the way that a particular policy is legitimized and sanctioned by an organization. Fourth, policy offers a roadmap for an organization to realize its mission. And then fifth, policy creates the broad structural framework that guides the practitioner in his or her professional role. So absolutely, for a practitioner, particularly a community practitioner, policy is what you are always moving towards and always striving to implement within your organization. So the authors reference two researchers, Gilbert and Terrell, who in 2010 stated that they viewed social welfare policy as an explicit course of action, stressing decisions and choices that have to be made that determine the outcomes of that course of action. They believe that social welfare policies can be interpreted as choices that determine what benefits are offered and to whom, how the benefits are provided, and how they are financed. They express these options or choices in the following 4 questions. Social welfare policy provides the basis for determining who and why someone, clients or beneficiary, is eligible for services, as well as the extent of the services being provided. One of the things that we spoke about in an earlier modular was the income level, and that there are services that are available to certain individuals that fall above the, I'm sorry, not income level, the poverty level. So there are services that some people will receive because they fall below the poverty level. But quite frankly, if a person makes $1 more than what the federal poverty level is at that particular time, they may not be eligible for those particular services. So that's a way of being able to determine who and why someone is eligible for services, as well as the extent to the services being provided. We've certainly seen a big change in terms of services that previously were provided to undocumented individuals that are no longer being made available to undocumented individuals. It determines what are the types of social services and benefits to be allowed. It determines how the benefits will be provided to clients. So for something like the SNAP program, or what previously was referred to as food stamps, at one point, the way that it was provided was through sort of these paper vouchers. And over the last several years, we've seen it kind of convert to more like a debit card, which makes it much more easier to manage. So that's a way of taking a look at how the benefits will be provided to clients. And then how will the benefits be financed? That's identifying the necessary funds to deliver the agreed upon services to the agreed upon clients. So whenever you're taking a look at social welfare policy and you're always looking at these particular elements, and these change consistently. Given a particular program, you may find that the eligibility will change. That could be based on, quite frankly, who's in office at that particular time. It could be the way that the benefits are provided. So these are things that are always evolving and always changing. So the practitioner's role in social welfare policy. Social work professionals of all kinds, direct service workers, planners, administrators, advocates, and researchers, all are affected by and have the potential for affecting social welfare policy. So let's take a look at each of these individually. Direct social workers have the knowledge of the impact of policy on clients, what works, what doesn't work, and what has to be changed. So someone who is working on developing new policies around social welfare services definitely wants to have an opportunity to dialogue with direct social workers. They are going to know what the impact of the policy is going to be on their clients, because they're the ones who are working with their clients every single day. And they know the challenges that those clients are having and the limitations and the restrictions they might be experiencing, lack of resources they might have, all that would contribute to whether the proposed policy is something that's going to be workable or not. Social work program planners know which policies lead to successful program implementation and which do not. So people who are developing programs or implementing programs, these would be things like social work administrators. They are absolutely going to know whether they have the staffing and the resources to be able to implement the policy that you're proposing, excuse me. And finally, social work program administrators must follow the regulations that are used to translate social welfare policies into subsequent action and how it impacts staff and clients. Social work practitioners provide important information to policymakers about the needs and concerns of the client groups they represent, and also monitor policy development to ensure that those needs and concerns are not neglected. And then finally, social work researchers are charged with determining the effectiveness of various social welfare policies in achieving their intended outcome. Social welfare researchers develop the evidence base for deciding which policies are best suited for which clients and under what conditions. So social work researchers are always the ones who are going to be able to come back and tell us your policy was effective and it resulted in change or improvement in people's lives, or it did not achieve the objective that you originally envisioned as part of the policy work that you were moving towards. So finally, good social welfare policy cannot be developed without the input and involvement of the social work profession. Okay. We are going to stop here, and when we come back for the third video in Modular 6, we're going to take a look at the administration and delivery of social welfare services.